what is the concept of will in UAE and how many types of wills are there?
If you don't have a will, whether it's here or elsewhere, you should be asking the question, why don't I have a will? But your children are also your assets. Not in a financial term, but they could be the biggest asset in your entire succession plan.
My wife, at a later point in time, decides to remarry. So what happens to then the asset that is now, because the executor is going to be my wife, and then if she remarries, what happens to the wealth distribution? Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Break Buzz. Today I will be doing the introductions. We used to get and still are getting a lot of queries about the legal aspect, about the inheritance for Muslims, non-Muslims, what are the legal implications, what are the legal aspects of owning a property in Dubai and UAE. So, who better to reach out to than a dear friend of mine whose name is Buddy Fatah. Me and Buddy go way back, I think around a decade now.
Yeah.
And the passion that we follow, both of us, is off-roading. One day, we're going to talk about that as well. So let me take this opportunity and introduce Mr. Buddy Fatah, who's a lawyer, who practices law, corporate law, in Dubai. And I seek his advice and his expertise all the time. There's no harm in admitting there are a lot of aspects of law that we as hardened real estate consultants are not aware of, and it's always recommended to go and seek the advice of a professional. A bit of disclaimer before we go into the conversation. Whatever we are going to discuss are going to be the guidelines, and whenever you have any specific requirement, query, question, scenario that you're faced with, always seek professional, competent legal advice in that domain. And with that disclaimer, I open the forum. Buddy, it's such a pleasure to have you. I've been trying to get you on this podcast for quite some time, and you have been ditching me. What was the reason for that? We'll start with that.
Yeah, so it's just been, you tend to push away the things that you'd actually enjoy doing sometimes. And This has also been one of the things that that we've been talking about. And, over the years, we've collaborated on so many projects. So first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be here and to be able to kind of share our passions and have a discussion on what's going on and talk about things that we've been doing and knowledge that we can share. That's really, really something that, is something that I aspire for. And thank you for giving me that opportunity. And then obviously, secondly, I want to correct you on one thing. Off-roading is one of our many passions, not just a passion.
That's the one we share. You don't want me to divulge other passions that you have, but that's the common passion that we both share. That's the reason I'm sure you have a lot of other passions.
Absolutely.
Which you would like to at times share with our viewers, but I leave that up to your good judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, be that as it may. Pleasure to be here with you. And thank you for the invitation and opportunity. You mentioned already housekeeping. It's very important. Everyone has different circumstances. And our role here is to just do some public service in terms of bringing awareness about how inheritance and succession works in this country. And it's really quite important because the vast majority of population in this country comes from outside, from elsewhere, and they might be having a different understanding of how inheritance and succession works, and then fold that into assets you own, real estate, which is one of your area of expertise. So, if in doubt, always seek professional advice because it's important to make sure that your circumstances have been considered and addressed. So that's really quite important to bear in mind.
Exactly.
And yeah.
And there are no cookie cutter answers for everyone. Everyone has their own specific scenario. What we are trying to do is to have a collective discussion about the experiences that we had and we continue to have. And based on that experience, we have defined and designed a set of questionnaire for you. And those are more on the line of FAQs that people ask, and we would like to address those. Generally, I see two types of clients. One type is the one who would always refrain from going into the legalities of, and at one point in time, unfortunately, they have to face those things.
Yeah.
And the second type are people who are cognizant of the importance of putting, like I say, the vertebra straight, the structure in place, and based on that structure, they would like to have the system set up from day one. And those are the people from my experience, and I'm sure you would second me on that, those are the people who have faced less challenges down the road. So, very basic question. The concept of will in UAE, and how many types of wills are there?
So it's a good question, and it's an important question. So a will basically is your last wishes, if you can put it that way. Now, depending on where you are, where the assets are, what your circumstances are, you can register a will or you can make a will. Maybe you don't need to register it. Each country is different. Each jurisdiction is different because they have their own set of laws and customs and practices. So that is the most important thing to understand. And I think, and it's a very good question that you've asked. And I have to say, which I do say to all of my clients and all the speaking events that I go to, and I talk to a seminar of people who know nothing about succession here in the UAE. If you can do a will, if there's anything that you need to take away from this discussion, is that if you don't have a will, whether it's here or elsewhere, you should be asking the question, why don't I have a will? And the one thing that you can take away is that if you are eligible to register a will or to record a will or make a will, wherever it is, do that, because that's the smallest thing you can do for your successors, your family members, your loved ones, and that's really quite important. So that is basically what a will is. It's your last will, it's your last testament. It is a declaration of your wishes, officially declaring what you want to do with your assets. That's really quite important.
And assets they comprise of both movable and immovable assets, right?
Yes, absolutely. Assets are, so we use the financial term assets, but basically what that means, it could be your checking account, it could be your savings account, your investment account, it could be your car registered at the RTA, it could be anything that's registered.
That's registered under your name.
Exactly, and is here in the UAE. And also, you can call it that way, but your children are also your assets. Not in a financial term, but they could be the biggest asset in your entire succession plan. And so you also need to bear that in mind. If you have minor children, then it's really quite important to make declarations and put safeguards in place for them to be taken care of if you're not there, or your spouse isn't there, or maybe at the same time you're both not there. So you need to have a mechanism. A will is a very useful instrument from that perspective as well. It allows you to provide certainty for everyone involved.
Thank you. When I was talking to a couple of lawyers and we were discussing the concept of will before that as well, there was a term used as domicile, which popped up a couple of times. Could you shed some light on it? What is a domicile and what's the importance of having a domicile in UAE?
Yeah, so domicile is a very interesting, it's obviously a legal concept, and it basically grants you certain benefits as to where you declare your domicile, or your domicile as determined, or your chosen domicile. Domicile comes in various different forms, and there's an element of expertise in that involved, which obviously we won't get into. But you can choose your domicile, but then you have to also make sure that you have enough nexus. So, for example, if I'm living here and I've never been to, let's say, South Africa, for example, or any other country, and I have no assets there and I have no connection there, it's very difficult for me to claim domicile there. And domicile can be for inheritance purposes, succession, governing law.
Domicile is basically something like, in layman terms, I'm sorry, I'm going to use a couple of layman terms so that everybody gets a basic understanding of it.
Good idea.
So domicile is something like where you were born, you get a domicile issued from there, and that's a linkage. Even if you now come and settle in the UAE, that domicile is going to link you to your country of birth. Is it something similar?
Yeah, so like I said, domicile is your connection to a
Connection to a place.
right? Basically, nexus or connection, and what that means is you want to assert that connection for a particular reason, and that reason can be a myriad, many different reasons. Now, our discussion is for the purposes of succession.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to claim domicile here in the UAE for the purposes of succession, and then obviously bill that for tax reasons, which obviously we're not going to discuss here because that can get very technical. Domicile basically is chosen. So if you live in the UAE, your children are here, you bought properties here, you have cars here, then you can say the UAE is my chosen domicile, even though you were born, let's say, somewhere in another country, like Johannesburg. Keep using the South Africa example. I don't know why, but
I know.
Seems to be going well. Maybe Cape Town.
Cape Town. I would prefer Cape Town.
Yeah.
Or Durban,
Yeah.
for that matter. Okay, so what's the concept of an executor, and why should you have an executor in your will?
Yeah. So your executor basically is your legal representative. Okay. It is your attorney, not in the sense that it has to be a lawyer. It can be your named legal representative. Now, in most families, nuclear families, the husband will choose the wife as the executor, and the wife will choose the husband as the executor in her will, because they'll both have different separate set of wills. And that executor is the person who is named and is able to go to the courts and say, look, here's a will, this person has deceased, here are the relevant documents, which I think we will discuss in a bit. And they're able to take legal authority over your estate, which is, in layman terms, whatever is left after you die. Your estate is basically comprised of all of your assets, including your debts, liabilities, funeral costs, etc., and so forth. So that's really what the executor does. And it's quite an important function, because that is the person you're entrusting to deliver, to follow your wishes on your will.
So technically, the executor has to be your next of kin, or can be anybody?
It can be anyone.
It can be anyone that you
there are
appoint.
certain guidelines and protocols. They should not be conflicted, but it can be anyone. And
if, for example, a husband nominates the wife,
yes,
and the husband dies,
yes,
and you have grown children,
yes,
who are not underage, who are of adult age,
yes.
can there be a conflict of interest there?
No. So when we say there shouldn't be any conflict, a will has many different roles, which I think you will get into perhaps. But you have the executor, you have witnesses. Executor we already explained. Witness is someone who has to attest that you've signed the will. And there are different requirements for a will, whether you register it in the DIFC courts or the Abu Dhabi courts or the Dubai local courts, notary. There are certain protocols, and which is why you need a professional to guide you to make sure that none of the conflicts have been left
Overlooked. Yeah.
But generally, a husband can appoint a wife.
And if he has more than one wife?
Yeah, so that's an interesting scenario. It is not uncommon. I have seen plenty of case studies around that.
I have seen them as well. That's the reason I asked it.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be it could be any one of the wives, but we'll get into Muslim wills a little bit.
Yeah,
different.
we'll cover that topic,
Yeah,
but just wanted
but
to.
yeah, it can be anyone,
It can
as
be
long
anyone.
as they are independent, they are of legal age. So someone below the age of 21 could not be an executor because they don't have the legal age.
And what's the difference between an executor and a trustee? Because
Yes.
trustee you have to appoint as well.
Yes. So trustee is, so for example, if you have a will which leaves assets to a minor, okay, a minor is someone, again, who is below the age of 21, or it could be someone, which is special needs, okay? And what that means is they cannot give legal documentation or signatures or authority. They cannot sign off, basically, for any assets they receive. So that in that scenario, minor children under the age, someone who is special needs, does not have legal capacity, as we say, the ability to sign and to give you good receipt of whatever they received from you. So in that scenario, what happens typically is that you need to have a trustee. Now the trustee is another function component on the will, not always needed, but can be fulfilled by the same person being the executor. So they're just switching their role. Executor is the person who delivers the wishes on the will. But what happens after he has collected
Delivered those things.
Yeah, collected the assets and collated them, and they're ready to be taken custody of by a minor, say under the age. That's where a trustee comes in. Trustee is someone who is accountable after the assets have been collected and distributed to each beneficiary on the will.
Till the time you have a minor,
Yep.
till the time that person becomes of legal age,
Yes.
the trustee would be in place
Yeah.
to oversee everything that is being conducted on, I would say, a day-to-day basis.
On a day-to-day basis, you could also have a scenario where, let's say, you have a huge estate, and the decedent, the person who's died, basically doesn't want the assets to be spent. He wants the assets to be managed responsibly. In which case, he could create a trust structure and appoint a trustee to manage those assets to create generational wealth. That's another area
Aspect,
where
yeah, that's a total different.
yeah, so that's also where you could see a trustee. But a trustee's role, to clarify, to answer your question, is it kicks in after the assets have been allocated and distributed to each person.
By the executor.
By the executor, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
So we've covered, I think, that amply. Now, one of my client came up with a very peculiar question, and I put it down, and he asked me
This should
that
be interesting.
yeah, very interesting when you interact with a lot of people. So he said, ask him, what happens if I pass away and my wife at a later point in time decides to remarry? So what happens to then the asset that is now, because the executor is going to be my wife, and then if she remarries, what happens to the wealth distribution between my children, and for example, she marries someone who has a couple of children on their own?
Yep.
What happens in that case? Because that becomes a bit complicated.
That is definitely a more complicated scenario, but it's not insurmountable. It can be resolved easily. But going down to the basics, the question that you've asked is, let's say if a husband makes a will, because what you do typically is husband and wife mirror each other's instructions, okay, in a nuclear family, everything to you, and then if you're not around, and this is my will, which means I've already died, then everything to the children in equal shares or whatever shares you want. That's the basic nuclear structure that you can have on a will, a mirror will between husband and wife. To answer your question, what happens if the husband dies first, or let's say the wife dies first, and they leave everything to their surviving spouse, the one who is still alive after their death? A will can be revoked. This is the important point here. The will can be revoked at any time by anyone, and they can make a new will. So one day they could, because it's not something that you can't bind yourself in a will that you make today. It can be superseded by another will tomorrow or
By
a third
you.
will. Yeah, obviously not by anybody else.
Not by anybody else.
But to answer the scenario that you've picked up on, which is a relevant one, is that if the wife decides to remarry or decides never to get married but changes her will after your death to leave everything you know in a very different fashion than what you have mutually agreed to do in your mirror wills, then that is something that you have no control over
But you already-
after death. Exactly. But what you can do is you can have, you know, trust structures or foundation structures, which are instruments that are used for succession planning, for generational wealth, and to control.
So in
how
that
the
case,
assets-
the generational wealth is more structured and it's more streamlined, and there is a certain guideline and a set of rules that are supposed to be followed by the
yeah.
remaining members of the family.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So all of the beneficiaries, they then have to. It's sort of an extension after death where you control how the assets are used, which a will itself does not allow you to do. So a will has limitations, of course, because once death happens, the will applies. But after the will has applied and delivered all the assets, you cannot control those assets. So one way to do that is to move into a structure, which obviously is a very complex and long discussion, maybe another podcast. But basically, yes, you can have a trust or a foundation, whatever structure meets your requirements and achieve that objective of controlling the assets from beyond the grave, if you want.
One particular question that some of my clients asked, and I answered that to the best of my capability, was what happens if I gift somebody something or I name a certain person in my will and that person dies before me. So I told them that you can actually go and amend your will at any time. So correct me if I'm wrong in that saying that.
You can amend your will, but also what you've described is a very common scenario, and the law, common law, and the law here as well recognizes that if I leave a gift to, let's say, my best friend who died the day before me, as a scenario, then he's no longer able to take that gift.
Yeah.
Because the
He's
law
not the
recognizes-
beneficiary anymore.
Yeah, so that gift, basically what we say is it lapses, it goes back into the estate and is recycled, if you want to call it that, and distributed as per your declarations, where you leave everything that remains to your wife and children or whoever you've
So
nominated.
the gifts are supposed to be done when you are alive.
Not necessarily, no.
Not necessarily.
No.
You can actually include the gift aspect in your will as well.
You can, yes, of course. That's a very important component, section on any will, where you leave gifts, whether it is cash, car, jewelry,
And that
your
works
pet.
for Muslims and non-Muslims both?
Yes, you can do that. Yeah. So the only concern that you have to be mindful of is that there might be tax implications for the donor or the recipient, and that's important to just have a thought about before you put someone as a giftee on your will. But yes, you can do that, because you might need that money till the day you die. But if it's there after you die and you put it on your will that you want to give, let's say, $20,000 to your best mate, then that will be taken out of your estate, whatever balance remains.
And if you're a
give it to
Muslim
them.
man,
Yeah.
and you're a Muslim man and you die,
Yeah.
wouldn't your remaining estate be distributed as per the Islamic law?
Yeah. So again, we have to look at it from the Muslim and non-Muslim.
So in that case, you need to have a will. If you do not have a will and you give a verbal, that's understandable, because if you do not have a will in structure in place,
Yeah.
then that's the importance of having a will, right?
Absolutely. Always important to have a will.
Exactly.
And to determine what I said earlier on was to see if you are eligible to have a will here.
Exactly.
Now, if we look at that eligibility, it's very simple, basic level. Either you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim. There have been recent legislative, amendments that have, obviously, maybe you have, but most people in our profession and yourself as well have probably heard of the changes that have happened.
Exactly.
The civil personal status law.
We'll discuss that.
Yeah. But
down
the
line
important
today.
thing at this point, as we get into the discussions, deeper into the discussions is that you need to, there's a separate pathway for non-Muslims and there's a separate pathway for Muslims. And depending on your eligibility under each, you would then be able to do certain things. But generally, if you are able to register a will here in the UAE, then you can do whatever you want in terms of gifts, and which is gifts before. So the structure is basically this. Let's say if you have an estate, first of all, the debts, loans, obligations, funeral costs, all these things have to be paid first. Then whatever is left
is going to be distributed.
Is then subject to any gifts that you have made a declaration of in your will. And then after the gifts have been delivered, been gifted, completed, whatever is left, we call that the residue in any estate. The residue, what you can say for the residue is, I wanted 20% even split, all to my wife, or layers of beneficiaries, so all to my wife, and if she's not there, then to my children in equal shares. That's the residue, whatever's left. So let's say if your estate is worth $1 billion and you paid $20,000, let's say, a gift to your best mate, then whatever is left after that goes in the residue section, and to your nominated beneficiaries for the residue section, because they take whatever is left after those the structures and cascades have been fulfilled.
Great. So one other aspect that I would like to touch upon is the time it takes to prepare a will. The reason I'm asking you is a lot of people come here and they say, okay, I'm not residing in Dubai at the moment. Yep. I've just come here for a holiday, or I've just come here to purchase a property, and I'm here for 7 days or 5 days or 10 days, and I don't know whether it is time enough for me to actually go and get the will prepared and executed and everything. So generally, how much time does it take from the process from start to finish? And can it be done remotely while not being in Dubai?
So very good questions. Look, in my experience, I see full spectrum of, let's say, the speed with which families or the breadwinner will move to complete their will and register it. If I can say one thing from my experiences, the only hurdle is the client themselves. Everything else has moved on so fast. To give you an example, pre-COVID, you used to have to go and physically attend these appointments for registration of a will. So obviously you had to fly to the UAE if you don't live here, or if you do live here and you have a busy schedule, it can be quite challenging for the husband and wife to go to one appointment, because maybe they have children and so forth and obligations. Work, family, all of these things can be difficult to manage. But thanks to COVID, what's happened is that all of the registries have moved their systems forward, and now they actually do not allow physical appointments. They only allow online appointments, with the exception of a few here and there. But if you go to the Abu Dhabi Judicial Department to register your will as a non-Muslim or a Muslim under the civil law, civil personal status law, or if you go to the DIFC courts to register your will, it is done totally and only through remote video calling functions, and it's quite seamless for the most people. So it's really so that's not the issue. I think what I see from my experience, the appointment, the drafting, even for us, different law firms have different pace that they can do it at. We're pretty fast as well. At most within a week, including your own time taken to fill out the information and give us all the necessary information, you could be done. You could have a registered will, notarized, attested and certified. And that's a huge peace of mind. I mean, that's certainly something that it's one of the things that I enjoy doing for clients, helping them, take care of this very important component of our lives, which is dealing with what happens after death. And that's really quite important. So yeah, that's really not the issue. But in terms of the speed,
let's say week to 10 days.
Yeah,
week to 10 working days.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a week calendar. It could be a week working. You could have it done in 2 days' time if you move fast enough. Because really, it's understanding what you want yourself, and then obviously relaying that to the lawyer or the legal team, the professionals. most clients that are very keen and committed on getting it done, within a reasonable time, I don't see them taking more than a week. And then there are obviously the outliers.
Good. And a very basic question: where should I keep my will?
Yeah. So depending on which registry you go with, they will keep. It's just like a notarized document.
So they keep a copy.
They keep a copy, and they'll send you a copy. Most of them send it to you, obviously electronic copies now.
And your executor would have a copy.
Yes. So
Or
what
your-
you can do is you can take a printout, okay, of that electronic copy, because everything nowadays is electronic. So you can take a printout and put it somewhere safe, either for your spouse or your named beneficiaries to know where that will is kept physically, because they can take that document and then go and verify it with the registry. So, as we mentioned, you have the Abu Dhabi Judicial Department wills, and then you have the DIFC wills. DIFC wills only for non-Muslims, and that's quite important to understand. They do not allow registration of Muslim wills. Abu Dhabi Judicial Department allows registration of Muslim and non-Muslim wills for all expats.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And a question which is not related to will but has some legal implications. Anybody who dies in the UAE, can they donate their organs in UAE, and something that you have any knowledge about?
Yeah, I mean, look, so obviously that is more of a medical question, but yes, there's been a lot of, the infrastructure has been put in place. Human cadaver transplants, the federal legislation was updated in recent years, and there is a donor list, UAE donor list, that has been put in place. There's a relevant government department that does that. I can't remember the exact details, but yes, they are active, and they have set up a framework, because and I've gotten this so many times over the years, and I used to, obviously in the earlier heydays when I started practice, there wasn't a framework. So I would basically say to the client that you can put this on your will, but I can't actually advise you on whether it's going to help anyone. But nowadays, because of all the changes and improvements, there is a system, because taking an organ out and transplanting it requires...
It's a certain time frame that
there's a time frame, there's a medical expertise, there's
there's a lot of process involved.
There's a lot of admin behind the scenes that we probably don't get to see. But yeah, that is there now, and that is something that people should be encouraged, because we need that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's not just the UAE, it's the region as well. I mean, when you compare US and other Western jurisdictions to how strong their systems and frameworks are for organ donation, then we still have a lot.
I think it's on their ID card.
Yeah.
In US,
Yeah.
it is on their ID that this person has.
Yes, absolutely.
Has been.
And I
nominated.
think you have similar arrangements here as well. You can get an organ donor card, I believe. You can update your iOS, your emergency information, and put on there all the relevant details if someone needs to. So yeah, that's definitely something. It's a good question, and it's possible.
It's possible. Good.